All right, MiniExam B Demo. Let's get into it. So with this one, I like to give a little bit of advice about how to approach these problems. So the big advice here is to go through and approach each of these problems first graphically or qualitatively. This is actually 2 instead of 3. And then really once you've approached them graphically, then go back and do the math. A lot of times I see students get hung up on the actual mathematics when the main thrust of the question is really about your intuition about thinking through these types of problems. So that's what I'd recommend. Go through and solve these problems graphically first, and then follow up with the math. I value both, but the first is much more important in my mind. Okay, so let's just get into this question. So this is called selling out to big chocolate. Chocolate bars are, used very widely in the wizarding world. Like Dementors, we can keep them away with chocolate bars. And so they're both useful and they're just they have culinary uses as well. So it turns out chocolate is easy to make. So there are many small chocolate shops that have emerged because of this. So this is an indication to us that this is a perfectly competitive world, perfectly competitive market. There are many shops selling chocolate bars. And we're given the supply and demand curves here. So we have price for the buyer and quantity demanded, and then price for the seller and quantity supplied. And then there's a little bit of a note here about the units we're using. Okay, so that's the main setup. And when we jump down to question 1, we're asked to use a graph to describe this market for chocolate and talk about its welfare. Okay. So I'm not going to follow my own advice because I know I'm very confident that as I walk through this, I can solve the mathematics. But my recommendation for you, the advice I give, is to first set up the graph for both problems, and then once you're finished, to go back and do the math. But I'm going to do it all in one step. All right, so let's set up the graph. So we have price on the vertical, quantity on the horizontal. We have our supply curve, and let's just make sure our graph corresponds. So we know there's not going to be an intercept. So this is going to run through 0. Supply curve. And let's even just put the numbers here. So this is P is equal to 1/2 QS. And then we have an intercept of 10. 10, and this is our demand curve, which is price is equal to 10 minus QD. Okay, so let's label our equilibrium. So this is Q star, and we have P star. Let's use some colors here. So we want to find everything below the demand curve, above the price, and inside the quantity. And this is our consumer surplus. And our producer surplus is everything below the price, above the supply curve. This is our producer surplus. All right, so to fully solve this problem, we need to find equilibrium. Let's find equilibrium. So we set prices equal to each other. So we have 1/2 QS on one side, which is equal to P, which is also equal to 10 minus QD. And we know in equilibrium, QS is equal to QD. That gives us market clearing, which So at this price, no buyers and no sellers want to raise or lower the price, and it only happens at this one point. Okay, so let's collect all the QS, all the Q on one side. So we have 1/2 plus 1. And at this point, I'm going to drop the subscripts. So we just have 1/2 plus 1 Q. And then on the other side, we have 10. So this gives us 3 over 2 Q is equal to 10. And divide both sides by 3 over 2. We have 10 times 2 over 3. So Q is 20 over 3. Let's put a star on this. All right, so this is our equilibrium quantity, 20 over 3. All right, and then we're going to perform the simple task of plugging this quantity into our supply curve. We can do it with the demand curve, but the supply curve is generally easier. And it doesn't matter which one we use. So price star is equal to 1/2 times Q star, which is 20 over 3. And this comes out to be 10 over 3. So our equilibrium price, P star, is equal to 10 over 3. All right, 10 over 3. Okay, so we have all the information we need to solve for consumer surplus and producer surplus. So let's do this. So we have consumer surplus is equal to 1/2 times the height, which is 10 minus 10 over 3, times base, which is 20 over 3. From here, all we have to do is plug this into a calculator. I'm going to simplify it one more step. So we have 1/2 times, so this is 30 over 3 minus 10 over 3. So that gives us 20 over 3 times 20 over 3. So we can do a little bit of simplification, which means we just have 200 over, 200 over 9 is our consumer surplus. And then producer surplus is a similar procedure. So we have 1/2, because it's the area of a triangle, times height, which is 10 over 3, times base, which is 20 over 3. And we can simplify this once. So we're going to divide that 20 by 2. So we have 10 over 3 times 10 over 3, which means our producer surplus is just 100 over 3. All right. So use a graph to describe the market for chocolate and its associated welfare. Okay, so we've done that. And if you wanted to write a sentence here, you could. But this is the most important components of this question. Okay. Question 2. Supporting shops. So where before we were in an equilibrium, here we're going to talk about a price floor. So we have a price floor of 7 silver sickles. Okay. And the idea here was to ensure that sellers would continue selling into the future. So remember, a price floor requires that the price not go too low. This is a floor. So what this means is we're requiring that the price be high. So if the price goes too low, then that's illegal. Okay. So on the vertical axis, we have price. Horizontal, we have quantity. We have our original supply curve, our original demand curve. Nothing's changed here about the actual supply and demand in this market. All we're doing is imposing a price floor. So we know our price is 10/3. That's our equilibrium price. And our quantity is 20/3. Q star. And let's just double check that. 10/3 and 20/3. So the first thing to do here is just to check that 7 is actually greater than 10/3. And 10/3 is like roughly 3. It's like 3.3. So it's true. So and we have a vertical intercept here at 10. So the price ceiling is pretty high. Let's label this in yellow maybe. So P upper bar, let's call that a price ceiling. What am I saying? This is a price floor. It's even there in the question. Price floor. I've been saying price ceiling. Okay. So this is a price floor. So the goal in this question is to use this graph to describe the market and the welfare effects. So first we're going to identify the quantity supplied and quantity demanded. So we have our QS and QD. So we're going to find those two, and then find consumer surplus. So consumer surplus, as always, is everything above the price, below the demand curve, and inside the quantity exchanged. So a couple components, right? First is quantity exchanged. Quantity exchanged is simply how much is actually bought and sold. So it turns out there's a bunch of leftover supply, a bunch of leftover chocolate that's not sold. So we have this surplus or excess. So the quantity exchange is just the minimum of the two. So there's QS that's brought to the market, but people don't want that much, so they only buy this much. So our quantity exchanged is QD. Okay. And we have an excess. Our consumer surplus is everything above the price. So we know the price is going to drop until it hits the price floor. And at that point, we can go no further. So we know the price is equal to the price floor. So when we're finding consumer surplus, we want to find everything below the demand curve, above the price, and inside the quantity. So that's our consumer surplus. And our producer surplus is everything above the supply curve, but inside the quantity exchanged and below the price. So we have those three conditions. It has to be a quantity that's actually exchanged, and then we find the difference between the willingness to sell, which is the supply curve, and the price they're actually selling at. So that's our producer surplus. And then we have deadweight loss, which is this area here, which is everything that used to be part of our producer and consumer surplus. So going back to this graph, it used to be part of our total surplus, but it is no longer. So that's our deadweight loss. And that'll be the last thing we calculate. Okay. All right, so we have a bunch of things to calculate here. So the first is our quantity demanded. And the way we do this is we just plug in the price of 7 into our demand curve. So let's do this down here. Quantity demanded is equal to 10 minus, whoops, price is equal to 10 minus QD. And we could rearrange this if we wanted to, but I usually find it easier just to use the numbers or the format we're given. So here we have 7 is equal to 10 minus QD. So we're plugging in the price to find this point right here. So that gives us a QD of 3. And for QS, we do the same thing with the supply curve. This is QD. For QS, we take price is equal to 1/2 QS, but we plug in a price of 7. 7 is equal to 1/2 QS. That gives us QS is equal to 14. Okay, so this is 3, and this is 14. We've one last piece. Actually, no. What we need, eventually we'll need this one. So we have QD. All we need to do is plug QD into our supply curve to get that point. This isn't actually a price that we encounter in this market. This is purely mathematical. Okay, so what do we call this? I don't know. Let's call this A. So A, we plug quantity demanded into the supply curve. So this is not something that has economic importance. This is purely mathematical. So we plug in QD, which is 3, into the supply curve. This gives us, on the vertical axis, we have 3/2. So this isn't actually a price that we care about. It's just A is equal to 3/2. Okay, so this is 3/2. All right, so now we have everything we need to find welfare. Consumer surplus is height, which is 10 minus 7 times base, which is 3 times 1/2. So this first part is 3, the second part is 3, so we have 9/2 is our consumer surplus. Let's put a box around it. Producer surplus is the combination of two things. It's that rectangle plus the triangle. So the area of the rectangle is height, which is 7 minus 3 over 2, so it's that A, times base, which is 3. And here we're not dividing by 2 because it's not a triangle. All right, so we have 14 minus 3 over 2 times 3. This is 11 times 3, which I'm just going to simplify to, well, let's write it out, over 2. So this is 33 over 2. And this triangle is height, which is, we're coming from 0 here. So this is 3 over 2 times base, which is 3, and then divide this by 2. So this is just 9 over 4. Okay, so then we use both of these terms. So we have 33 over 2 plus 9 over 4. And that comes out to be 66 plus 9 over 4, which is 75 over 4. And that's our producer surplus. Okay, and then our last term is deadweight loss. Okay. For deadweight loss, there are two ways of doing this. One is simply to add up our consumer and producer surplus and subtract that value, so our new consumer and producer surplus, from the values we found up above. So we could calculate total surplus. Total surplus is equal to consumer surplus plus producer surplus, and then we find a value. So we can do it that way. Subtract this one from our total surplus here. Just add up our total surplus, add up our consumer and producer surplus here. And then we take the difference, and that will give us the deadweight loss. It's the change in total surplus after we've imposed this policy. So we can write like the change in total surplus. So that's one way of doing it. The other, which is going to be more direct, and in this case it's going to be simpler, is just to find the area of that triangle. So we know it's a triangle. It's not always going to be a triangle. It's a triangle here. So our deadweight loss is just going to be height, which is 7 minus 3 over 2, times base, which is 3. Oops, that's not right. Our base is a little more complicated. It's 20 over 3 minus 3. And we multiply that by 1/2, or divide it by 2. Okay, so we have our height, our base, and our 1/2. All right, so let's just simplify this. So we have 14 minus 3 over 2. So that's, well, let me write this out. 14 minus 3 over 2 times 20 over 3 over 3 minus 9 over 3. And then we divide that by 2. Okay, so these will cancel, which gives us 11 times 11 over 3. So in this case, we have 121 over 3. And that is our deadweight loss. Okay. Okay, so this is our deadweight loss. This is how much total surplus we lost with this new policy. But we also, so we know consumer surplus is going down. So let's write this. Consumer surplus has gone down. We can see this because consumer surplus after the policy is 9/2, and before the policy it was 200/9. And just visually we can see this is much greater. Producer surplus, on the other hand, is more complicated. We've lost part of our surplus. We lost this bit, which used to be part of producer surplus, but now it's deadweight loss. We've lost it, but we've also gained this amount from consumer surplus. So consumers have lost a lot here, but producers have this mixed effect. Some total surplus has been gained and some has been lost. So let's look at producer surplus. So producer surplus before was 100/3, and now it's 75/4. So again, producer surplus has gone down from 100/3 to 75/4. 100/3 to 75/4. Okay, so this policy was, directed at ensuring chocolate sellers could survive into the future. But what this policy has actually done, even though the price that sellers are receiving is higher than it was before, they're actually receiving a smaller total surplus, or a smaller producer surplus. So each item they're selling is sort of a better deal, but for sellers. But because they're not able to sell as much, because there's this excess is created, they've lost some of their producer surplus. Okay. So let's just double check we've answered everything, and then I think we'll leave it there. Use a graph to describe the market for chocolate and the welfare effects of the price floor. Yeah, so we've generated a deadweight loss, consumer surplus has gone down, and producer surplus has also gone down. All right, that's it.